What's your I met a celebrity, but didn't let on that I knew who they were story? Robin Williams used to walk around my lone childhood country town near SF. I saw him once, after hearing many rumors about his sightings, not entirely unlike Bigfoot or Nessie sightings. My brain didn't fully comprehend what it was seeing, but I could tell he was trying his very best to remain incognito and not draw any unwanted attention. We locked eyes. He smiled, I smiled and nodded back, and we both went our separate ways. I was sitting at the Genius bar at an Apple store one day and a very large man with dreads came and sat next to me. He was bringing his phone in to get fixed because he dropped it and didn't have a case. I overheard an employee jokingly say, "You wear a helmet when you play football, shouldn't your phone have the same protection?" I knew it was Larry Fitzgerald, but I didn't want to be a fanboy, so I started asking very broad questions about what he did as a profession to stay engaged in a conversation with him. Larry Fitz is, to this day, one of the nicest, most humble people I have ever met. I met Justin Timberlake and had no idea it was him until someone told me afterwards. Went to a basketball game with my dad, and we stopped by the bar area in the arena first. The game had just started, so it was pretty empty except for the bar itself. My dad goes to the restroom and I walk up to the bar to order a beer. There's only one seat at the bar next to a guy in a baseball cap and sunglasses. I politely ask if the seat is taken, and he just says nope, it's all you, man. We shoot the shit for a couple minutes. He's sitting on my right and eventually he says he and his wife are going to go to their seats. He extends his hand and asks my name. I tell him and ask his name. He says, "Justin. Nice to meet you, dude. Have a good night." He and his wife leave and the bartender comes up to me and says, "You know that was Justin Timberlake, right?" I immediately did a double take and couldn't believe I didn't recognize him even with the hat and sunglasses. I told my girlfriend at the time, who was a huge Justin Timberlake fan, and she couldn't believe I met him without knowing it was him. She wouldn't let it go for like a month. Couple of years ago I was playing blackjack at a relatively low stakes table, maybe $10 minimum. I was chatting up a lady in her 30s next to me, just chatting, nothing more. Her husband was sitting next to her. He was a frumpy guy in his 60s. After about 30 minutes he took off and left the table. I was still chatting up the lady and she told me that other guy was her husband. I asked why they were in town and she said for work. She mentioned that her husband was the drummer for Aerosmith, Joey Kramer, playing at the same casino the next night. I stupidly asked how when he started playing with them. Her reply: "Since the beginning." Edit. Chatting up in US English. I guess in the UK it means something different. There really was no flirting involved. I, almost literally, ran into Shaq at a small restaurant in LA. He was standing in the doorway. You know how some people are so tall you don't see them? So I'm exiting the doorway and say, "Excuse me man," and he stepped aside so I could leave. He is one large human being. Met Elon Musk in a Tesla store in LA. Really wanted to meet him, but didn't want to be that guy. Decided I had a plan, so walked up to him and said, "Excuse me, do you work here?" He replied, "I mean yeah, kind of." I say, "What can you tell me about the entertainment console of the Model S?" He says, "Let me see if I can find someone to help you." To which I say, "Now I'm just fing with you." He laughed and shook my hand and walked off. My dad met Robin Williams in an elevator. He got in, and they rode a few floors in silence. They stopped on a floor and this bunch of fans ran in and started getting pics with Robin. My dad said he was gracious and took pics with everyone. The doors closed and they rode a few more floors and my dad turned and said, "Does that ever get old?" And Robin smiled and said, "Nope, never." Then my dad got off on his floor and they nodded to one another and my dad went on with his day. I was 10 years old in 2002 when my mom took me to the Bronx Zoo for the first time. It was a rainy day, so we practically had the whole place to ourselves except for 3 British kids running around, chaperoned by a woman. My mom quickly befriended the woman, while I made like a kid, and joined the horde, looking at spiders and scorpions, and sharing in the awe and excitement of the animals. After about an hour, when we said our goodbyes, my mother told me that the kid, Daniel, who I had been hanging out with had played Harry Potter in the movie that came out last year. I had thought he looked familiar. When I was younger with fewer responsibilities, I used to just drive around for the hell of it. To me, driving as a hobby, late at night, was my favorite time. The streets are empty. My uncle is like this too. I asked him if he wanted to meet at American Coney Island. We sat down in a booth. A couple guys walked in after us and sat down behind us. Eminem, Dr. Dre, and a guy I later found out was Jimmy Iovine. We paid them no attention, but we knew who they were. They finished before us, and as they were walking out, Eminem nodded at us and said, "Thanks for not making a big deal about this. We got you." He and the other guys disappeared around the corner. Jared Leto. I work in an outdoor goods store in Boulder, Co., which for those who don't know, is one of the biggest climbing towns in the US. He came into the store to get some stuff as he's known to travel here and climb with other big pros, notably Alex Honnold, who is a buddy of his. He had been outed in the middle of the footwear department by a coworker on mine in front of a big group of customers, so by the time he got over to the climbing area where I work, he was really on edge and unfriendly. I walked up to him, and honest, he just acted like he wasn't hot shit. I acted like I didn't really know who he was and just spoke to him like any other customer, even breaking conversation with him at several points to answer questions for other folks as opposed to giving him my full undivided attention. After about 5 minutes of that, he totally relaxed and his entire demeanor changed. He went from being somewhat rude and cold to being very chill, calling me bro etc., and I ended up walking around the store with him for like 25 to 30 minutes helping him shop. The only time I implied I knew who he was towards the end as I was ringing him up. He asked me to recommend some climbing spots close to town like the Flatirons. It was a beautiful Saturday, and I said to him that those places are great, but he'll get bombarded by people if he goes there, and I recommended some spots just outside of town instead. He sorta leaned in and thanked me for my discretion, and that was it. It seemed like he really just wanted to be treated like a normal guy. I met Simon Pegg when I was working as a cashier at Borders. It was like a Tuesday in the afternoon and the place was empty. He came up to me with some stationery and I started ringing him up. The entire time I was thinking he looked so much like him, but I didn't think it was him, since I wasn't in the UK and as far as I knew he wasn't filming a movie in Chicago, so it was a pretty quiet transaction. After it was done, and I was handing him his bag with his stuff, I jokingly said, "Has anyone told you that you look like the guy from Shaun of the Dead?" He replied, "I'm the guy from Shaun of the Dead." I met a celebrity, but I didn't realize who he was. I posted before in a thread, buried in 10k comments. Doubt anyone saw it. Years ago, like 20 years ago, I went to see Adam Sandler stand up at a small comedy club. Clearly I knew who he was because I got tickets to his show. My date and I were running a smidge late and ran into a guy in the lobby, a guy I used to work with, so I was like, "Hey, Danny, how are you doing? What have you been up to?" He was like, "I'm good, how are you?" I responded that I was good, but running late for the show. Had to run, and he said, "Okay, have a good night," and walked off. As my date and I walked into the club, he said, "You know who that was? It wasn't Danny. It was Adam Sandler." But, gotta say, he played the part of Danny well. One of his better roles. Working cashier at a tiny candy store during a lull, and suddenly we're swarmed with black suits and shades. Some guys in suits come in with more shades shadowing them. They browse, buy chocolates, and hand them to another suit. I joked to one guy about that box definitely not being big enough for everyone, and he laughs and buys 3 more. They pack up, and shades escort them out. Couldn't have been more than 10 minutes. When I went home, I found out that Air Force 2 had landed for a conference nearby, and I had managed to convince the Secretary of something, Defense, I believe, to buy $200 of chocolate. So you're the reason military spending is out of control. I worked at a movie theater in Albuquerque at the time we were filming the first Avengers film. Captain America was about to come out. I remember because we had a huge standee of him in the lobby. I was reading in the box office when 3 people came up. Guy asked for 3 tickets to Bridesmaids. It was dark out, and he had a green baseball cap and sunglasses. He paid with a credit card. Christopher Evans. I stared at the card after I swiped it. Handed it back. I need you to sign the receipt. He did. And then he walked in. Edit. Thanks for all the comments guys. Just to add on. I didn't recognize the other 2 with him. One was a blonde woman and the other was a guy with buzzed hair and a 6 o'clock shadow. Also I only lived in ABQ for a year in 2010 to 2011.